Cameras on, so then go to share screens. And then your presentation is right there. Do you have music or video?
This may not be the right one here. There should be a PDF one.
Okay. I think they might have put it in a because the clicker doesn't work with the PDFs.
Yeah, they said they were going to upload the
PDF.
Is there? Where's the?
Let me see here. So that's the and
Oh, it's showing.
is this one?
That's it. Yeah. We just made a couple last minute updates. So
Okay, so that's this one full screen, right?
Yeah,
Where's that?
Yeah. Hey, do you want to set that over here?
Yeah.
And I'll just sit until you need me to speak.
Yeah, it's hard.
Here's full screen for this.
Yeah. For you, so.
see, yeah, I don't know if people want to get their projects funded, so they might be asking about that. Yeah, great.
I already talked to Doug and Melissa. And our staff's here, there's Kelsey, Matt, or Jazz, Matt, Anna.
We've actually got a bit up on here.
Oh, there we go. PDF.
Great.
You do all the clicking, sometimes look like all the speakers were advancing their own slides.
Yeah, we'll have to click it on here. So it's a little quicker. It should be
Something. What is that? All right.
To hit enter the arrow key.
Probably arrow key.
The arrow, okay. It's like it's different on all of them. They're not. That's- There you go. There's a development team working it. Have you met Jacob or Thomas yet? They do community development. Well, not community, they actually do like design work for development. Review. I don't think so. I have a pretty loud voice.
I may use it.
Okay.
Quieter voice.
You can't hear me, but I get nervous like that.
There's your mic.
Okay.
You want me, guys? Do you want me to read your bio? Let me introduce you.
Sure.
I'm right off there. Go ahead. I didn't want to go in. We'll go get coffee.
Jessica's bummed she can't attend, but our treatment plant is home.
Yeah.
It's not looking good.
All right, Josh, you're gonna be popular, standing room only. All right, good morning, so my name is Mary Gorgeous. I'll be the moderator for Josh's session. Thank you for attending. Before we start, just make sure your phones are on silent for us. So there's no interruption with the presenter, and then questions will be afterwards, if possible. Josh, just repeat the questions so that the online audience can hear. So I'm just going to introduce Josh quickly. This is the Wenatchee 9th Street Stormwater Retrofit program, just to make sure you're not in the wrong room. Josh, and I forgot to ask you how to pronounce your last name.
Van Wee.
Van Wee, okay. Josh Van Wee has worked in a variety of water resource projects in Washington State. His experience includes planning and design of stormwater retrofits, municipal capital improvement projects, and fish passage culverts, and habitat restoration. Josh has closely coordinated with agencies, including the city of Wenatchee, city of Spokane County, and others to successfully develop plan studies and PSNE packages. Josh, take it away.
Yeah, thanks. And I have Darci Mattioda with me here. Darci is with the city of Wenatchee. I'll let you do a quick intro. I guess we didn't get your bio into the thing, so.
Oh, that's okay. Hi, I'm Darci Mattioda. I'm a utility planner at the city of Wenatchee on the public works side. And we've been working closely with Osborn Consulting on this project in an area that is in need of some very important retrofit that we'll tell you about today. So thanks for coming.
So yeah, thanks. We appreciate everyone showing up. It's really great to see a lot of people in person, especially after just everything being shut down for COVID. So really good to see everyone here. Our presentation is on meeting community needs through stormwater planning. We'll touch on kind of a couple key topics. I will talk a little more about the stormwater modeling side of things and engineering side, and then Darci will talk some about the city's experience with getting the project funded through an ecology grant, and then some lessons learned just through the overall project process. So to give a little bit of background on the project, you can see the project location on the map here. So actually pretty close to where we are now. The convention center you can see is, right close to the Columbia River on this image. And then the project area is kind of right in the center of Wenatchee. So not too far from where we are now. If anyone was on the walking tour yesterday, we did walk past 9th Street, which is where the outfall from this project goes to. So it goes from that central area down 9th Street and into the Columbia River. The topography and canyon drains is kind of a key part of this project. So you can see as you get towards the west end of this image, it gets steeper going up into the canyons. So there's some natural drainage paths that go from there and then through the city and out to the Columbia River. So and on the next slide, I'll touch a little bit more on those. There was some coordination with Wenatchee Valley Community College, who is a secondary permittee. So that was a key part of just having good communication with them and working through a solution that works for both the city and the college. And then I mentioned the project was funded by an ecology grant. Some of the goals with that grant were to decrease sediment to the Columbia River. The city has kind of a programmatic approach of removing stormwater discharges from these canyon drains. So that's one of the main ways that we wanted to accomplish that goal of removing sediment from the river. And then installing water quality treatment BMPs for stormwater in an area that was untreated. So these images show the canyon drains in the project area. I think these are worth spending a little bit of time on because they're a little bit unique compared to a typical storm drainage system. So the canyon drains take runoff from several canyons west of Wenatchee, and they only convey natural flow. They're not conveying stormwater typically. There are some locations like our project site where stormwater basins discharge into the canyon drain. So the idea is we want to separate out any of that stormwater flow, allow only the natural canyon flow from these large undeveloped basins to flow through the canyon drains. And then you can see the condition of them. They are partially piped, they're partially open channel. In some places they flow on the private property or through people's backyards. So it's kind of just a mixed system. It's it's not piped all the way down, it's different depending where you are. And here's a good example of something that we really want to try to get away from. You can see a shallow catch basin without really a sump or anything, and that's discharging straight into the canyon drain. So something like that, we're really looking to take that offline, either completely remove it from the canyon drain system, or at least provide some treatment. And I'll pass it off to Darci to talk a little bit about the water quality grant.
I'll skip the microphone unless you can't hear me. I've been known to have a loud voice. So when we looked at this project, we knew we needed some funding. We didn't really want to raise rates, and that kind of brings us to why would you do a grant? And that was our primary focus, is we didn't want to raise our stormwater rates any more than we had. We'd already maxed out our budget from our capital project side, yet we know we really need to address this area. And we really are trying to focus on these canyon drains, as Josh said. So that led us to start looking at the SFAP grant through Ecology, and it became a perfect fit of treating water quality in a large area. So when you look at these, this was one of our first projects that fell under the new Ecology program of dividing the grant up. Previous grants we had done were planning and construction combined. When we went for this grant, Ecology had made the decision to break it into 2 grant applications. So today, this is a planning grant, but we have applied for a construction grant to fund this project, and we're working through that. The funding cycle can be challenging, but if you understand it and you have long-range goals, then I think it can work really well for you. We have quite a few of these here in Wenatchee, and they work well for us. They don't work well if you need to build something tomorrow. They don't work well if you have an emergency. But they work really great if you can allow 3 to 5 years to plan for these and capture the planning cycle and then the construction cycle. This one specifically, you always apply for your grants in October, and the following legislative session, July, they get funded. And then your next rush is to have all your planning documents ready so you can apply for that construction grant again the following October. That is the gray window that you might miss. Maybe your planning needs more in-depth exploration and you're not ready to go ahead and apply for that grant. And that's where the length of time turns into that 3 to 5 year program. And honestly, after listening to all your speeches, you're on 15 and 20. I'm feeling pretty good about 3 to 5 years. So, but thinking ahead with what that looks like, you gotta know that every October is your opportunity to apply for another grant, and you gotta have certain documents that Ecology wants, or you're gonna wait another year and get another chance at it. So in this case, we were close enough that we felt like we had the data. We went ahead and applied for the construction grant. We're working through some of that. That's what I mean by that funding cycle and thinking ahead. Some other things that we thought about heavily here at the city is revising our comprehensive plan list and our capital budget to forecast all these projects that we would like to apply for grants, as that's one of the requirements. This needs to be in your comprehensive plan, and you should have your budget. And then traditionally your council or your board should have already given it a blessing that it's in your plans. So if you haven't done that, I encourage you to look ahead at what projects would fit into this model of that 3 to 5, 10-year program, and start listing them in your comp plans as you do your updates. So we've expanded our list quite a bit in the last year or two so that we can open ourselves up for grant money that becomes available. And even though this is a planning grant, if you go to fill out that grant application, it asks for some very detailed information. So it's good that you're thinking a lot about this before you actually write the application. Maybe even open up the application and make yourself really familiar with the questions, because they ask a lot about water quality benefits, community benefits, how you're going to address all the stakeholders in your community. If you're familiar with your city, town, or jurisdiction, I think that a lot of this becomes just second nature. We don't know all of our players here in the Wenatchee Valley. We have a couple different counties. We have a couple different tribes. We have the dams and the PUD and the parks. So we see those repeat themselves. But again, you want to think about that. Even if it's just a planning grant that you're applying for, you're going to need to know all that information. And then one of the things that can be a heavy lift, depending on the size of your work, is that 25% match. It's a great 75% funding. It's one of the best programs out there, but you will be required to match that with 25%. And sometimes that can be a heavy lift on a $3 million project, or another $750,000. So you got to know that you have that set aside and it's been approved in your plan. So, and they do require my time and submittals, but I'm fortunate that this is what I get to focus on. So I have that time. I don't think it takes all of my time. I would say that it's intermittent. It'll take a couple weeks of my time, and then I won't have to work on it for a while because I've submitted and I'm waiting, or we're designing. And so it's not a heavy lift all the time. And so I think it's a great program. We're very grateful that we have several projects funded, and we'll tell you a little bit more about how we're going to use that funding.
Right, so I'll pick up with kind of the planning process that we did through the first part of the project that Darci's talking about, with the initial grant leading up to going for a construction grant. And I'm going to talk through sort of the basin analysis and like the different stormwater basins that we looked at. So we're going to start zoomed in on our project site, and from there kind of peel back a couple of layers to look at some of the things that made this project a little bit complicated, and then how we use those to arrive at some solutions that, you know, benefited multiple parties in the community. So this figure here shows the college or the campus basin. You can see through the center, this black line is a storm drain line that drains the entire college campus down and discharges to the canyon drain on Ringgold Street. The other black lines on here, there's a storm drain trunk line on 5th Street and another trunk line on 9th Street. And that's the one I mentioned that goes out to the Columbia River that we walked past on the tour yesterday. So we started by just looking at the campus basin and how much flow was coming through there, and finding our water quality flow rate. So depending on, you know, specifically how that's set up, you're looking at either a 6-month storm or a 2-year storm if you can do it like after a detention facility. So that was kind of the first layer that we looked at. We also found, above and beyond the water quality flow rate, just the amount of flow that we're dealing with in larger storm events. So those larger flows are currently going into the canyon drain and then continuing out to the river. So to zoom out a little bit, this is looking at the 9th Street Basin, and then you can see our campus basin there kind of in the center. The 9th Street Basin, obviously quite a bit larger. It drains a pretty good chunk of the city. A lot of it is fairly highly developed. And then you can see the 2 outfalls to the river. So the 2 systems are basically going parallel, where you've got the canyon drain in red, and then the black line is the storm drain draining this blue drainage basin out to the river. So we looked at that basin. The key thing that we identified there was that we did not expect there to be a lot of extra capacity in the 9th Street drain. So what we wanted to do was take the flows out of the canyon drain and then take them up to 9th Street, where they would just continue parallel along that path out to the river. But during large storm events, our model was showing that the 9th Street drain was probably going to be flowing full, and that was pretty consistent with what the city had seen, with just knowing that there were some spot areas where they had full pipes. So that's kind of the next layer. And then to zoom out even further, we can look at the canyon drain basin. So here we're looking at a very large drainage basin. You can see it's not developed, it's outside city limits. It's mostly natural, some forested areas kind of in the southwest portion, but a lot of it is more grassy areas where you'll get quite a bit of runoff, and especially in summer thunderstorms, there's a lot of runoff that goes down through the canyon. And I think the key finding here is just that our model was showing the amount of runoff in those large events was more than what the capacity was in the canyon drain near our site. So we were expecting, at some points upstream in the basin, there's probably some flooding areas. There's probably some areas where flow is getting backed up and kind of pressurizing the pipes, or sitting in shallow areas for a while before it makes its way through the system. So I think that really just gave us even further justification for, we need to get the water out of the canyon drain, the stormwater discharge, because it's definitely limited on capacity. So from there, I'll go to talk about some of our alternatives. What the modeling was showing us was really that we needed a system of both treatment and detention. So the treatment, we want to treat untreated stormwater runoff from the college campus. There's some parking lots and some areas where we're expecting pollution generating impervious surfaces to have pollutants that are going into the stormwater. But with the 9th Street trunk line being at capacity, we didn't want to add any additional flow there. So we needed some way to mitigate those peak flows before it went into that drain system. So we looked at several alternatives. The Wells House parking lot is one that's shown here. So the Wells House is a historical building on the campus. It's kind of at the downstream end of their storm drainage system, and there's a good amount of fall at that location. So it's a good spot to catch the flows. So that was kind of our main location that we looked at for stormwater treatment facility. And then you can see here, we also looked at an option of doing detention at that same facility. The other options that we looked at were essentially keeping the stormwater treatment piece here, but then moving the detention to other places. So we looked out at some different, like a baseball field. There's a soccer field on the campus, and we looked at some of those as more of kind of the stormwater park type solution, almost like you guys were presenting for Spokane, but where you may have a big open area where you could have some stormwater go there in large events. And then I should say the technology that we kind of landed on for treatment was storm filter cartridges. The city uses those pretty regularly and has a pretty good system of doing the maintenance and swapping out the cartridges. So the city's really comfortable with those. We wanted to go with something that fit well with their current O&M system. The second kind of different alternative that we looked at was moving away from the campus area and doing smaller, like localized storm filter catch basins throughout some of the surrounding neighborhoods. And so that was just kind of going back to that earlier picture of the canyon drain, where you've got small road drainages that discharge straight into the canyon drain, catching some of those and then putting them back into the city's storm drain system. What we ended up with was kind of a combination of the best elements of these different alternatives. So I'll go to the next slide here and show what that looks like. So you can see our campus drainage basin. You can see the 9th Street basin, just the downstream portion of it overlaid there. What we decided to do was to pull some water off of 9th Street. So we've got a pipe that's coming down from 9th Street to that Wells House parking lot, which is where the flow control label is. So that's going to be an underground vault or an R-tank type system. From there, we're looking at going into treatment, and then you can see the orange diamonds on here. There's treatment also distributed throughout the neighborhood. So we're going to catch runoff at those different spots, treat it, and then take it back into the 9th Street storm drain. So the goal was really treat the flow and then also balance out those flows in 9th Street so that we're not creating additional capacity concerns there. And then with the project, the city was also able to kind of add on a canyon drain realignment. So this location here, you can see that the red canyon drain kind of jogs through those private properties. That's an open channel that's had a lot of flooding, like nuisance flooding issues and getting on runoff onto private properties. So just doing the project in the vicinity, that gave the city a really good chance to pipe that runoff and give it a better conveyance path where it won't flow down on the properties. So I'll pass it back to Darci to talk through some lessons learned.
All right, thanks, Darci.
Well, as you can see up here, our big lesson learned on this project was really related to cultural resources. Here in the Valley, we're very fortunate to be in a beautiful area on the Valley floor. Also one of the larger tribal meeting grounds in the history of the region. So with that, if you pull us up on DAP, we're either yellow or bright yellow, meaning we're high risk or very high risk. So not only does all state funded projects require you go through a cultural resources review, but pretty much anything we do in the city of Wenatchee, we assume we're probably going to do a cultural resources review. It's a question of on what level. And so this lesson learned, everybody did a great job on their part. I think the real lesson here was I don't feel like I started early enough in this process. And so it delayed me a little. Back to the timing of the funding cycle, where you want to know all of your planning information so you can apply for that construction grant. I struggled here because our cultural resources on this project took quite a bit longer than I had anticipated for many factors. But so our lesson learned is just to really start that consultation application early. The application is simple. It requires some of the basic project information to request that consultation. And then the longer time frame comes after you've submitted that. When Ecology reviews that, they could come back with different scenarios. On this particular project, we did every scenario. They first came back with our high risk being that we were going to need an archaeological survey. And I got this news about July. So every archaeologist that doesn't live in Wenatchee was already booked. So just waiting on that schedule took a little bit of time to get someone to come to the area. There's a job opportunity if someone wants to be an archaeologist in the Valley, because there's not one right now. So getting on that schedule, getting them out, getting the report, getting it submitted, that takes time. And then it was no surprise really that they came back and they also asked us to do monitoring. So this is all before you can do any ground disturbing activity. So Josh was waiting because, as he showed you, we had several alternatives chosen. And really the bottom line was going to come down to those soil tests and whether we could infiltrate or not, and which one of those 4 locations was going to be optimal for this project. But we couldn't move forward with our design process because we didn't know. And so it ate up a lot of time. And if you have this type of project and you know you're going to need some cultural resources, I would encourage you to start early to get that information ahead of schedule, because it will really improve the speed of your design and set you up better for applying for that other construction grant. So this one did end up taking about 6 months. We did get the information back on our soils, and it turned out that 2 of the locations that we wanted to use really had to be cut out. And that's how we ended up with the Wells parking lot. So just took some extra time, but we got there. Yeah, really, about all there is to it. Yep. So the conclusions on this project are many. It's a great project. We're pretty excited about it. It's going to happen here in the next 2 years. We're working with the college on it and they're pretty excited. But the conclusions, the next steps for us just goes back to the application process again and the design efforts by Josh. When you do these, your grants are ranked. You get a scoring sheet if you haven't seen that before. They're really easy to read. You can make yourself familiar with them on how they score your projects. So know that you're going to be graded and know that you're competing with whoever applied that year. That's where that information ahead of time comes in really handy, that you know what you're planning for before you've really planned it. And really how to maximize the environmental impacts and community benefits. And this one has a lot of community components with the whole college being there. And then we have the historical house right in that area. And it's smack dab in the middle of a residential neighborhood. So there's going to be new walking paths all around the college. And it will just bring a lot of good quality to this area that hasn't had much in the past. And doing all that planning up front, knowing what you're trying to hit, your successes you're going for. You know, we're really going for water quality here. Okay, great. Yes, we're going for water quality and the benefit analysis of considering all those options. We could have chosen any one of those options. They would have worked for us, but through the testing and the community and the college wanting to expand, it really helped us narrow down the 4 options that Osborn had prepared for us. And working with our partners and our stakeholders in the area also helped narrow down that focus. So the last thing, if you haven't done an Ecology grant, I would encourage you to become familiar with their process. It's straightforward. They have great guidelines and they have a application process through their Eagle website. But I will say, doing 5 of these different grants, it's the same process every time. So once you become familiar with their process, I think that it's not a hard process to navigate because you know what to expect with each one. Communication has been key, going back and forth and being able to ask a lot of questions of our ecology reps. They've always been available. So we're very appreciative of all the time they've taken to answer our questions when we need it. And lastly, if you're going to do one of these, I wouldn't recommend trying to do it the week before it's due. It's a long, lengthy application process. Give yourself a month, give yourself time to ask your coworkers and engineers questions, because that's going to build a stronger application for you. So start early. It takes a little bit to get through the application process.